Hi, nice to be here now at this side of the room. So the Netherlands has been pretty active in getting their scientific publications in open access. You heard also Gerard Meijer telling just a bit about that yesterday. And I think it's now 3 years ago that Sander Dekker actually was here at the APE. Is that 3 years ago? Yeah. And he spoke about our ambition, and a lot has happened since. Our Ministry of Education, Culture and Sciences is still very much in support of open access and open science. It's now in our governmental letter. And in 2017 we had a nice number of 50% of open access publications in open access. And what we now call transformative deals, well, we didn't know that word when we started with them, we have them in the Netherlands for ACS, for Springer Nature. We started with Springer Nature, for Elsevier for 30% of the content, for Oxford University Press, for Wiley. So we're doing pretty okay, I would say. However, that's just reflecting journal articles. And at the VSNU, so I'm both library director in Delft, and I'm also program manager open access for the VSNU, the Association of Dutch Universities, as well as the chair of the Dutch University Libraries Association. And at the VSNU, we developed a roadmap open access 2018-2020. And as a part of this, we are also developing policy on open access books. So I will be very happy to sit there and listen to our speakers, to learn. Well, mind you, as a library director in Delft, we are a technical university, we're not that much focused on monographs. But for some of our faculties, those still are very relevant, the long read. So the question is whether we indeed see a paradigm regained. So before I give the word to Jason, my ideas for this session is what we also saw yesterday, is that we have the 3 talks after each other, so in a row, and they will all have 15 to 20 minutes max for their talk, and then afterwards I will invite them over here to the table, and we have hopefully a plenary discussion. So then, Jason, may I introduce you? Jason is a senior associate librarian and a director of publishing services at Michigan Publishing. It's the library division that also includes the University of Michigan Press and the Deep Blue repository. His department is the home to about 30 open access journals, and it publishes about 15 books per year across a wide range of disciplines. It's also the digital home for Lever Press, ACLS, Humanities ebook, and other partners on the Fulcrum platform, which is being developed with funding from the Mellon Foundation. Jason, please. And give him a hand. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm Jason, and I direct the publishing services team at Michigan Publishing. So I was recently in New Zealand, and I got a chance to meet quite a few people there. And after discussing which of their family members were extras in Lord of the Rings, there's usually a pause. And then the question would come, so what the heck is happening over in America? And of course, without asking, I knew that the question was about new initiatives in humanities book publishing, because what else could they be talking about, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff happening on our side of the Atlantic, and at the heart of much of that are university presses. My goal here is just to give a high-level overview of some of these things for the curious. So a little background on university presses today. The more than 140 members of the Association of University Presses, or AU Presses, are mostly, but not entirely, located in North America. There's actually a really cool one in New Zealand. They publish more than 14,000 titles a year, many of which are in the humanities. And they have close to 300,000 titles in print. And nearly 3/4 of large research universities in the US and Canada support a press, either directly or through a consortium. These mission-driven publishers have long been able to publish specialist monographs in particular fields that drive forward these fields and the careers of the faculty who write those monographs, but may not turn profits. And so as more scholars, funders, and legislative bodies focus on open access, while library budgets continue to shift away from print monograph acquisitions, and scholars do more and more of their work digitally, How are presses in North America innovating to stay cutting edge? I'm going to start by talking about two complementary initiatives with differing focus, Tome and the Lever Press. Then I'll briefly touch on the developing ecosystem of community-based open tools like Editoria, Fulcrum, and Manifold, supported by the Mellon Foundation, that aim to supply presses with efficient and sustainable modes of production, discovery, and preservation of multimodal digital publications. So first, Tome. In partnership with the Association of American Universities, Association of Research Libraries, and the AU Presses, 14 U.S. institutions, and they're mostly large research universities, have committed to each making available 3 grants a year of $15,000 to their faculty members to facilitate payment of open access publishing costs for their monographs. They're calling this program Toward an Open Monograph Ecosystem, or TOME. The central requirements of TOME are pretty simple. Each work must be peer-reviewed. It must be open access with a Creative Commons license and available for download as an EPUB 3. Beyond that, each institution is free to implement the program in a way that's most consistent with its own individual institutional culture. So which faculty are eligible and which publishers are eligible varies from institution to institution. Most are making funding only available to tenure-track faculty and only to nonprofit publishers like university presses. Michigan's participating, we're actually a little bit weird because we're willing to consider for-profit publishers as well. Although so far most of our grants have been to faculty publishing with the University of California Press. So right now Tome is in a pilot phase. The institutions have committed to 5 years of funding. We're in year 2. So far I think 28 titles have received funding and 6 were published last year. When works are published, they're being added to what's called the Tome Referatory, which is a website hosted by the folks at Figshare. And the purpose of this site isn't primarily to deliver the content of the books, although you can get them there, but more so it's to provide a central record of the initiative, identifying where the files are being deposited and published, and gathering indicators of engagement like altmetric, and hopefully in the future usage stats from the various platforms that they live on natively. Tome, I think, is a promising program in that who pays for scholarly book publishing is more closely aligned with the benefits. That is, most of this funding is coming from the provost office and of the faculty's parent institution, which benefits from the prestige of the publications of its faculty. However, legitimately, Tome's being criticized in that there are many scholars who are disenfranchised by this sort of model. Those at smaller institutions or in the developing world who can't pay, those who are participating in institutions but aren't tenure track, and independent scholars who would have no access to this sort of funding. These criticisms are valid, but institutions, at least in the United States, are the best bet of getting a more comprehensive way of supporting open access book publishing. There's no government funding to rely on, and none's coming, as there would be in the EU or the UK. At least Tome provides a mechanism for keeping the conversation around this topic going, and with the right people in the room. There's a steering group that meets once a year, which includes provosts, university librarians, and press directors. And where else, other than Tome, do these people get together to talk about open access monographs? Still, the issue of scholars at less wealthy institutions, smaller institutions, being able to afford to publish open access monographs is a real one. Lever Press offers a possible alternate solution. Lever is a digital-first open access press that's collectively funded by the libraries of 46 small liberal arts institutions. Most of them are from the Oberlin Group, which is based in the US. Almost 4 years ago now, a task force charged by the Oberlin Group with developing the Lever Press idea into a functioning reality selected a proposal from Amherst College Press and Michigan Publishing to provide editorial and production services for Lever Press. The press, which officially launched in December of 2015, is guided by the mission and ethos of liberal arts colleges, committed to publishing under a business model with no author fees at all, and to supporting born digital long-form scholarship. Each member library pays an annual contribution of between about $2,000 to $8,000 depending on its annual collections budget. So the smaller institutions pay less and the larger ones pay more. And this supports the operations of Lever Press. In return, the libraries and their institutions get a voice in the editorial program of the press. But what do we mean by being guided by the mission and ethos of liberal arts? Well, there's no single answer to that question, but Lever titles should, at a minimum, show a deep commitment to interdisciplinarity, engage with major social issues, and blur the lines between research and teaching, just like their sponsoring institutions do. So we've only published one book so far for Lever Press, but we're excited about that. But expect quite a few more as we ramp up in 2019 toward publishing about 20 books a year through Lever. As many of you know, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation has in recent years funded quite a few initiatives in support of open access and open platforms that are tied to university presses. I'm going to run through a few of them really briefly. Editoria, which has been a collaboration between the University of California Press, California Digital Library, and the COCO Foundation, is a tool designed to make editorial and production workflows for university presses more efficient, especially for simple monographs. Based entirely on the web and an open platform, it's open source, provides an authoring and editing tool called Wax. And in Wax, which is basically Google Docs for scholarly communications, all workflow participants from authors to editors to copy editors and production folks can author, edit, and style and annotate according to various configurable permission settings. So while doing that work, semantic structure is added in the background to the HTML that lives in Editoria, and that enables automated PDF typesetting and EPUB creation and export at no additional cost to the press. Just click a button. So the exciting thing to me about Editoria isn't so much the technology, although it's cool. It's that it can help us drive down the cost of producing simple monographs substantially, I think, which in turn can help make the OA subsidies of programs like Tome and Lever Press more sustainable. At Michigan, we're going to use Editoria to produce Lever Press titles and possibly University of Michigan Press titles too. And that's also what Longleaf and the University of North Carolina Press are planning, but on a larger scale. The Sustainable History Monograph Pilot, led by Longleaf Services at the University of North Carolina Press, is another Mellon-funded initiative, and it's going to be publishing open access versions of 100 to 150 monographs in history from 10 to 15 university presses. They'll be using Editoria to manage the production of these books, hopefully streamlining the workflow and reducing costs. Presses will be subsidized for their cost of acquiring and peer reviewing these books, and all the copy editing, design, and typesetting costs will be covered by Longleaf with the grant. The presses will receive fully copy-edited files back at the end of the process, EPUB 3s and print-ready PDFs that they can use to create print-on-demand versions after a sort of 90-day reverse embargo after the OA version comes out. The grant will ask authors, host institutions to provide matching funds if possible. But the ultimate goal of this project is, as I understand it, is to try to reduce the customary per-title BPC or subvention request from a level of like 15,000 or more down to the level of about a typical journal APC. So the idea is, if that can be done, then we can find more sources of funding for open access book publishing. Meanwhile, the University of Minnesota Press is developing Manifold, which is a really cool platform. It facilitates the publication of iterative and expansive works in the humanities. So to enable this sort of expansive digital scholarship that we're seeing more and more of, media that can't be incorporated into a print book, like video, audio, high-res photos, archival materials that go alongside the argument of the book, software downloads. It's all layered on top of the book in this platform called Manifold. But to me, probably the most exciting feature of Manifold is that it supports iterative publication of works. So an author can go to Manifold and post a draft of a book, an early working draft, receive annotations and comments from the scholarly community, do revision, and continue iterating and posting new versions and getting comments all within the platform. And then the final published version of the book, after peer review, goes up on Manifold, and you can actually see the development of that argument over time with clear versioning of the book. Many authors we encounter, especially in digital humanities, really want to work this way, and they can use Manifold to do it. And finally, last but not least, maybe least, I don't know. For the last 3 years, Michigan has been building an open source publishing platform for books that we call Fulcrum. So why? Well, as publishers, we listen to the needs of our authors who want to integrate digital source materials like audio, video, 3D models, data sets, and maps right alongside the monographs that they're writing based on these materials. As librarians, like I'm a librarian, we're also committed to preserving for the long term, I won't say forever, but for the long term, all of these digital materials right alongside the narratives of the books that they accompany so that our readers can study them far into the future. That's a really hard job. And we just didn't see that need being met by any existing platforms. So with help from Mellon, we've been developing Fulcrum along with partners from Indiana, Minnesota, Northwestern, and Penn State University presses. And we're using an open source technology stack called Samvera Fedora, so we can leverage the work of a broader open source community as well. So just to illustrate briefly what Fulcrum was built to do, I'll talk about the GABE project. Since about 2009, archaeologists, it's a team based at the University of Michigan, but with archaeologists from all over, with the GABE project have been investigating an ancient Latin town called Gabii. It was a rival to Rome in the first millennium BC. So this book was published by the University of Michigan Press using Fulcrum, and it focuses on the construction and habitation and periodic repurposing of this individual house in this town of Gabii outside of Rome. And the authors used the Unity 3D gaming engine to build this 3D model of the house. And they wanted to integrate it in with the book alongside their database of all of their findings, all the way down to individual knives and pots and things they found in the ground, with images and data that scholars could use to understand what they're doing. So they came to us with a narrative, a 3D model, and a database. And the really cool thing about this book on Fulcrum is the platform integrates that 3D model right alongside the narrative of the book and the database. So a researcher can seamlessly move from one to the other and back again without having to go to any external websites or download any database files or rely on anyone external to the library and the press to host any of this information. So, and the plan is to preserve all of this together as one digital object in Fulcrum. So Fulcrum supports open access, but it's also built to support subscription-based and first sale collections. We're business model agnostic. Just last Thursday, the University of Michigan Press launched its ebook collection on Fulcrum with over 1,000 titles. And we also have the ACLS Humanities ebook collection, which has about 5,000 titles. And both of those are for sale to libraries. And Lever Press, of course, will find its home on Fulcrum too. We're also partnering with Editoria and Longleaf to collaborate on production and discovery workflows across this building ecosystem. The hope is that after everybody's grant funding runs out, that we work together enough and we found synergies so that we can be more sustainable and bring in new partnerships. So in conclusion, I hope I've given you at least a semi-interesting, semi-useful, high-level view of some of the innovation that's going on at North American university presses and libraries. There are a lot of exciting collaborations happening, and as we've seen over and over throughout this conference, collaboration will be key to all of our success. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I would like to introduce to you Anke Beck. As of August last year, Anke joined IntechOpen from the Gruyter, where as managing editor she led a traditional company into a prominent position in the competitive open access market. IntechOpen is the largest open access book publisher with a focus on STM books. And as their CEO, she brings significant experience, deep understanding of international scholarly communications, and proven ability to anticipate market demands to IntechOpen. Isn't that a nice sentence? Anke serves on various university boards and centers for advanced studies in Germany and abroad, and has recently been appointed to the Council for Scientific Information Structure of the Republic of Germany. Anke, please. Give her a hand. Yes.
Hello. Does it work? All right. Thanks for having me here. So, my title is "Open Access Books: A Diamond in the Rough," and my argument will be that books will bring much more to the science world than we think. So, the first question is, how much academic output is there? Many would throw up their hands and declare that this question is impossible to answer. And it's clearly wrong to cite only Thomson Reuters, who says that the academic output increases by roughly 5% per year, because that dramatically undercuts the true expansion and that no database is able to answer. So bibliometric analysis say that possibly we speak about an increase of 8 to 10% per year. That equates to a doubling of global scientific output roughly every 7 years. Scopus in 2017 quoted 2.8 million articles. My question is, but where on earth is all that knowledge hiding? Let's start with what we know. So there is a total of 60,000 electronic journals. That does not count the print-only journals, of course. And in 1 year, from 1 year to another, we saw an increase of 4,000 e-journals. Having said this also includes journals which, particularly in the open access world, just carry a couple of articles per journal. So this is not a good reference number either. But in any case, what it shows is that we know a lot about journals. In contrary, on books, we are completely misinformed. There is not much knowledge surrounding books. There are not many studies surrounding books. And particularly in open access, books are there's often scarce information, incomplete information. And if so, if we get information, it's very often outdated. The confusion, what a book is, already starts with a very clumsy definition, which I found in one of these rare studies. It says, a book is a long academic and peer-reviewed work on a single topic, normally written by a single author and extended to also include peer-reviewed, edited collections by multiple authors. This already sounds a little bit indistinct, let's call it. But if we do not want to answer how many academic books there are, how many open access books are there, possibly we get a little bit closer here. But also here I failed. So consulting sources like OpenAir, the Director of Open Access Books, and APE, they list 10,858 open access books, which is clearly too low, versus the Gutenberg project, which lists 56,000. But I will conclude this academic exercise of just counting numbers, because this impreciseness would not bother me too much if it was more precise on other grounds. So if we accept that it is particularly open access which enables scholarship further and faster and is the first and necessary step to enable open science, we need to include the format book as well into our consideration. And therefore, my radical proposal in the end is that we should not distinguish at all between the format book and journal, as it contributes content. But as long as we are not there, and I accept that also, we cannot rush. I will look into funder policies of various stakeholders, the distribution of money in the system, and will argue that traditional concepts of the medium book, regulations surrounding the book, and digital reality differ appreciably, but in the digital age do not need to have to. So let's have a look at the misconceptions of book and what we could already do in 2019 to challenge that picture. So in the following, I will look and I will also give you some anecdotal impressions of what happens to open access book publishers while looking into mandates, into the red tape, which is bureaucratic handling of books, the financial aspects, and then I will go into services. So let me start with an anecdote as promised. So in the Frankfurt Book Fair, I had a very long talk with a librarian, and I tried to promote our cooperation with Knowledge Unlatched, which gathers funding for 100 open access engineering books per year. We had a very long and interesting discussion, which lasted for roughly 45 minutes. And in the end, she said, "Oh, it was really interesting talking to you, but unfortunately, we are not mandated for open access books." And she concluded, but I hope that others will pay, so I will profit from their contribution and I don't have to buy the print books. This is, of course, not how open access works, and this is not how crowdfunding works. So, but with this conversation, I had a look into, so what are the mandates for open access and for open access books? We have in total 898 mandates for open access by universities or institutions. And if I count, then we see in Europe 245 open access policies, and out of those we have only 85 explicit mandates for books. And in the rest of the world we have 198 policies and 73 only for books. This is just a side remark. Germany doesn't have one. The same is true for Denmark, Finland, France, but of course there are exceptions to the rule. Austria, for example, is a very positive example, which at least has spelled out their policy for open access very, very clearly. There's also the Wellcome Trust and some others in the making. So we as open access publishers, of course, appreciate Plan S explicitly, particularly that it also includes books. There are also other endeavors which I do not want to go into, so I would like to acknowledge that there are endeavors and that there is something in the making. But what we have to see is that the promises to include open access into these endeavors start as of 2020 or even 2027. That's a long way to go. And I wonder, so if we regard academic content just as content which can hide or which can be wrapped in anything, whether it's a journal, a book, or a database, whether we can afford to ignore books and the importance of books. So if we agree also that open access is a service fee, then we should more or less also be able to ask for the same price if the service permits that. So for the sake of time, I'm not going too much into detail, but so much on that. So if I argue that a book is nothing else than a special issue in a journal, then the book publisher certainly receives much, much less money for the same output in a content output in a book if that publisher publishes in a book and not in a journal. So while I think also Knowledge Unlatched carries out currently a survey of how much fees are charged for books and how much each publisher or what service is involved. And if you would consider the same output in a journal compared to, let's say, roughly 10,000–12,000 euros per book, you would be you have to pay in Biomed Central $25,000, in PLOS between 16,000 and 13,000, Springer roughly 30,000, and Wiley 52,000. So what is the problem? The problem is also the current bureaucratic handling of books. It is not just that there are fewer policies and issues around costs, there are additional hurdles for books, such as the need to deposit hard copies of books in national libraries, and I wonder why. So as Wilma has mentioned, I have currently switched employers and now live in the UK. And so recently something crossed my table which really made me laugh, because we had to deposit 5 copies of open access books into UK libraries, and I got the following letter, which I think is worth reading to you. It says, quote unquote, "Legal deposit has many benefits for publishers and authors. Your deposited publications can be read inside the British Library and will be preserved for future generations. Your work become part of the nation's heritage, providing inspiration for new books and other publications." So the cost for this batch, which we had to deposit to the UK libraries, was a high 5-digit number, and I included in my daily now English prayers that also open access books can contribute to the British heritage. And I do not want to go too much into detail about the importance of the abstracting and indexing systems, But of course, I mean, here we also fiddle around with very, very clumsy perceptions. So while, for example, once a journal is registered, there's not a problem at all to have that registered in the Web of Science. But for a book and a book citation index, suddenly they try to fiddle around how worth is a book series. And I mean, as I have already started to radically think, I think, why should we even bother about impact factors? And why should we suddenly try to struggle and assess a book series or the importance of a book? So why can't we just drill down to the importance of an article? And therefore, I think we have to radically adjust our systems too. So yesterday we have already wondered what authors want. And I think it doesn't matter whether they are journal authors or book authors, they all want the same. So if we argue that books and journals in essence are the same, we have to give the same treatment. And publishers, my argument is, have to do their work too. So they have to take care of a smooth and automated publishing process. They have to take care of an interactive XML, not just a PDF. And we have to be represented in many repositories and databases, and so on and so forth. We have to take care that we provide, as journals do for an online first service, where chapters go online when they are reviewed, typeset, and ready. And I just wanted to show you how it can be done. So I think, what we have to do for book publishing, we have to radically rethink what books bring to the academic market. I wanted to say, and this is very important to me, that it is not the publisher I'm representing which provides already that service, but it's also many other publishers, like, for example, Springer has radically addressed all the added values it adds for journals, also for books. It is just not enough of us book publishers which do the same. So I just wanted to show you how it can be done. So this is the subject level metrics, which we can, of course, display. And then we can also show the importance of a book. So we can show how many downloads there are per book, which I would say is the feature which libraries would count how often is a book checked out. We can then go a deeper level, and we can show the citations in dimensions. Of course, we can show the citations in Scopus, and we can even go further, and we can show the distribution of an article, where it is read, where it is downloaded, and who quoted the work in general. Of course, so there can be a very, very deep drill down of a chapter which is of importance to the author, to the academic world, and of course it also gives the publisher an indication of where the book can be seen and who works with this kind of content. These are just a couple of impressions. So, and in the end, we can, of course, also give the author a report back where his work or her work was read, cited, and where the possible collaborators are. So, in conclusion, that's my conclusion. So to conclude, we have highlighted a couple of dilemmas where books are clearly structurally disadvantaged, and that had to do with no clear mandates, a lack of funding, handling an 18th century expectation what a book should do or not do, and what it can provide and what it cannot provide. So while I have also argued that if we ask for an equal distribution of funding and institutional recognition, we, as publishers, have to take the product line book to the digital age as well. If open access for the advancement of scholarship is a serious endeavor, one should harmonize the open access requirements across the landscape, and books should not be considered on the same level, should be considered on the same level as journals. Books should be part of the endeavor to make open science possible. It is the content, the data that is crucial, and it is not the wrapping. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anke, and what a nice, cheerful pictures you had. Yeah. Now the last speaker is Wolfram Horstmann. He's the university librarian from the State and University Library in Göttingen. And prior to this position, you were working as associate director in Oxford. And currently he's leading several strategic projects in the areas scholarly, communication, open access, research data, and digital transformation for the University of Göttingen and of course also for the library. And you're active in LIBER, the European Research Library Association, and also in RDA, the Research Data Alliance. Wolfram, please.
So I'm going to try to switch that because I wanted to show you something. Okay, while he's trying, I would like to say hello, and then I'm very happy to talk about books. It's quite unusual for me. I think I've given more than 100 or 200 open access presentations which were focusing on articles, and I think it's my first presentation on books ever. So I was very happy about that also because I could go back in time in a way. First, because I was looking at the best book I've ever seen. I was kind of searching what is the best example of a book that I have experienced in my professional life, I would say. And I found this one, Dickers and Guys. Maybe some of you know that. It's a wonderful chemistry book, and a collaboration between a gifted educational author and an illustrator and a graphic artist. And I thought that might be probably the book that I would really see as the representative for myself. And funnily enough, but this is not shown now. Wait a second. I think I have to move that over, which is not possible. Anyway, funnily enough, I found you can click on the presentation later from 1999, which I missed during my studies, an interactive version of that book. So this time in the 90s, when the digital possibilities were explored, they were having, I think, very, very interesting experiments about what could be done with textbooks, and they showed animations and so on. And the thing you see on the right is actually also a journey into the past for myself, because when I was transitioning from research into information management, what we did was we were producing educational simulation, which is basically an educational textbook, what you see here. And we really try to use all the possibilities that the digital world was offering for finding new ways of presenting knowledge and of teaching. So we used that in teaching. And we did not only animations, but these are real simulations, so algorithmic interpretations of knowledge that are being made interactive here to teach how the neuron works, because I'm a neurobiologist by training. And so implementing kind of cybernetic system theoretic knowledge in an interactive version of a textbook. So that were interesting times. And then I was thinking, what did really happen, and what do we have today? What is the common sense of books? And still, we have a very strong perception of a book as a beautiful, very useful thing, even in academia, not only in the everyday life. And it's just nicer than digital in some respects. Still, we say digital is powerful, of course. It's much more versatile than printed books. And we have these developments over the last 20 years in academia, where now we basically don't need any print anymore in journals. And the use of books is declining in a way. But we also still have a use in the social sciences and humanities of books. We see that in the libraries. It's very, very prominent still, this kind of use. So we also see that the journals are developing to something dynamic. We have the whole open science movement, and maybe the journal article itself is still an entity that is very much preserved, but everything that is around the journal article, the research data publications and dynamic visualizations, this is evolving into something different in terms of transmitting knowledge and transferring knowledge. And books, do we really see that? I think that we see some things, but we don't really have that much progress in that area as we would find in the STM and journal publishing regime. So I'm giving you 3 backgrounds about the books, and the first one, which is pretty obvious, and I didn't have to do a lot of research here. I just did one small study with 10 German academic libraries that represent 27 million holdings in the German library statistics portal, and computed or looked at the averages over the last 4 years and kind of normalized them. And what you see is what you would expect, basically, namely that the holdings are increasing slowly but steadily. The added books per year decrease. The book spend also decreases. The holdings of e-books increases, and the spend increases, and the circulation of books in general decreases. What I have not shown here, what is important, because this looks very much like libraries becoming less important, is that the visits in libraries are increasing in general. So we really have a change of the information behavior that we are observing in the libraries. But for the book part, this picture, I think, is pretty representative. The second background is about market. There was a study about general publishing by Spiegel just recently. This is why I chose it here, even though it's in German. The message is that there are changes, but in general it's quite stable. I mean, they're saying books became more expensive and less books are bought, but they have to produce some title, right? In general, the study shows that the market is quite stable. If you look at the market in general, not only the library usage, but the market in general, you will find the reflection of what I showed for the libraries. It's PricewaterhouseCoopers here saying that the print is decreasing in all areas: consumer, educational, and professional, and the e-books are increasing. This is the general trend. We know the specific academic market sector quite well in the article domain. This is exactly what Anke said before. It's very hard to get the data for books and monographs right. We know that in general, the academic publishing has become a big business. This is why I was using those quotes from Wall Street, online, and NASDAQ to show that it really has arrived at that point, and I think books will be part of that, but we don't know quite yet which part of that will be. There are some studies, one also funded by the Mellon Foundation and from Esposito and Bach, and they predict, it's actually exactly about the North American publishing scene in universities, the presses, and they predict a growth in the production here, which is interesting. You might expect that there is not such a growth, and they have good reasons for doing that. There seems to be a trend towards smaller publishers. A student of mine, I'm teaching here at Humboldt University, had an assignment the other day, last week actually. I couldn't really integrate the numbers, and she did a comparison between journal and book development in two publishers, De Gruyter, I cannot pronounce it that well, Wilma, and and Springer. And there you saw very interesting that the investment, the diversification, differentiation in Springer was very much focused on the journal sector, and they produced quite little more books, but in De Gruyter it was just the opposite. It was also about the open access percentage. So not so much investment in the journal sector, and many, many more books. Now, De Gruyter is not a small publisher, but it is a smaller publisher as, compared to the really big ones. And then together with this trend, I think we can say there might be a trend towards smaller and medium publishers. We have slow open access uptake. I didn't go into detail here because I knew that there were other presentations about that. The market seems to be steady. And monographs in general, I think, are, as a concept, or books in general, are pretty resilient, as this is what I mentioned also in the beginning. I was even tempted to say sturdy. There will be a mixed, or there is a mixed economy at the moment between print and digital. It is, I mean, you two were not mentioning it before, actually, that explicitly, that it's still there. So it seems to be a slower process than we have assumed, and that is what Alan Harvey from Stanford University Press says here. Similar to what I said in the beginning, that 10 years or 20 years ago, you would have expected that the e-books take over everything very, very quickly, and it somehow didn't happen yet. There is a differentiation, though, of business models in the monograph market. Even though other aspects are quite steady, I will not go through all of them. Several of them were mentioned. But we have a very, very rich diversity of different funding models and experiments, consortia, freemium models, institutional funding, traditional revenue sales, grant-funded initiatives like the Mellon one that was already shown, endowments in university presses in the US particularly that serve institutional purposes as well. So here we see an evolution, I would say. And we have, of course, didn't probably reach the state where we were thinking it could reach 10 or 20 years ago, the digital potential of books, but there are some examples. Here I showed Project Muse that is uploading books to a platform for presenting them quite nicely in HTML5. There is Open Edition, which collects books from presses and publishers around Europe, particularly in different formats. And I showed another example, and I could have shown the video or wanted to show the video of an inorganic chemistry textbook here. However, I have to say, it is not super convincing. I didn't see so many, I did some desk research on that, I didn't see so many very interactive textbooks. There is a lot of potential for really a new form of knowledge transfer, particularly in textbooks and science textbooks. I don't see that too much. In the humanities, though, funnily enough, there is a very intensive use and a very intensive development about new forms of publishing a book or conceptualizing a book. So what was formerly called an edition, so a work that is critically analyzing some kind of material from a famous author or scholar, which is a big market in the humanities book publishing. There you see new developments, and what I'm showing here is that these are notebooks of Fontane, which is a German author. Probably you have heard about him here in that area, who made sketches and notes about his travels. And here you can see what XML representation can make out of it. So you have a diplomatic transcript in the middle where you see what was actually written there. And what I would have shown if the interactive parts were working is that you can even have mouse overs of that, so you can directly translate. And in general, this is a kind of a blend of the research process as such and a research tool, and it produces directly a representation, a digital representation of a book in a way. So what we saw is that the printed book use and investment declines overall in libraries, but is still indispensable in the social science and humanities. More visitors come to the library though. E-books are on the rise, but the promises for e-books, which is just not interactive e-book, but just e-books, have not taken over the print yet. The overall monograph market seems to be healthy. We have differentiation of market shares and business models. And new forms of book publishing evolve, but maybe not that fast as I would have hoped or expected. Seems that the monograph development as compared to the journal market is pretty slow, and this is why I came to this title. A book is a book is a book. I think the reason for that is that it is strictly epistemologically conditioned, and I'm saying exactly the opposite that Anke said before, so we will have an interesting discussion. So a book is a book for a reason. The method is the language. You need to have the argument represented as text and as long text, and the compression of the argument is a disruption or is detrimental to the argument, and that is the opposite. In the journal article, Roman in the previous session said something very interesting about that. That natural language is actually not the right representation for scientific knowledge. So because the method here is observation, and the argument benefits actually from making it very short and breaking it down into classes of representations that are smaller, or even making it a picture. I think this is the reason that I see for the book being persistent, and I called it the books as the persisting defeat of Henry Oldenburg, because he was the guy who was introducing basically scientific research, experimental research, and the publishing in the Royal Society in the 17th century, and then further developed in the 18th century. So, and that was the start of these two different forms of publishing in a way, and I see that that this is probably persisting. So, as opposed to usually what I say about open access and the journal market, I'm not saying something very critical here. I have a wonderful flower landscape that I see actually in the book that seems to be quite healthy if the business model keep differentiating and the formats keep developing and the authors are optimally supported, as I also mentioned. There is only I would say a lower risk looming here, that we have another Death Star experience with oligopolies and price increases and the destruction of culture. So I would say session of the title Paradigm Regained. No, I would call it paradigm maintained. Thank you.
So, may I ask you now to have your seat there so we can all see you? And thank you all. And so we have some different opinions, which is also and always very nice, I think, if we are in a concluding panel session. And before I ask you all, well, perhaps just one question. So, who is doing books? Yeah, that's almost half, I would say. But before I give the mic to the floor, perhaps I could ask you to also reflect a bit on the other presentations. Now let me start with Jason, then and go to Anke.
Sure, thanks. Well, Anke, I actually have a question for you. So I've got to keep you two separated here. This is why I sat in the middle. No. So if we take it for granted for a minute that publishers would agree to break down the barriers, the differences between books and journals as content types and formats, if publishers did that, where do you think the most resistance to that sort of change might come from afterwards?
From the libraries.
Yeah, I was setting you up, wasn't I? Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do, actually, but I was curious about your viewpoint on that and why.
Yeah. I think, I do not want to be too, shouldn't sound yet now too complicated and too intellectual. But so what I was proposing is to completely rethink the entities in which we currently think. And that, so when we start with this radical thought, then we have to rethink all the rest as well. So we have to rethink not only, we have to rethink the business models, we have to rethink how we acknowledge the work of what authors do. We have to acknowledge the channel, how the money is distributed, who is empowered to do that, and so on and so forth. And currently, and I think that applies to, I mean, as far as I know the world, I do not know, of course, everything, that, so the most money is distributed by the libraries. So if they rethink, they start rethinking, then the rest will shift too. So, but perhaps I should hand over to the librarians.
Do you want to?
Well, you're a librarian too, I think. And well, there is certainly a very strong part of the library that is maintaining the principles as they are. And you mentioned this example of the British Library and the legal deposit, which is quite telling. And in general, the idea of collecting is still very, very present and probably not helping in supporting the local, we're talking about academic libraries here, the local authors to produce knowledge, because I think that would be the actual flip of the system. Somebody called it inside-out library, is that the library starts to become an actor in the production process and work, for example, with publishers at an early refinery stage and the publishers at a later refinery stage. And I think also the publishing market will develop in a different direction there, more on added value services, but that just as a side. It is a very difficult question because on the one hand we need the record, and for certain areas we need the book record still, as I mentioned, and to support novel forms of knowledge production and knowledge circulation is costing money also in the library system, and nobody really has that very clearly on the agenda, because the expectation is just, oh, well, we cut a little money here, but I think the transformation capacity in libraries is simply not large enough to fulfill the role of keeping the versions of records and providing them for the students and also some for the researchers in special collections libraries, plus doing all the innovation stuff.
Did you want to add something? No? So perhaps triggered by what you said, Wolfram. So I'm also, of course, a library director, and we have 3 things that we focus on. It's open science, academic output, and inspiring learning environment. That's the library. And we had making a textbook in 1-day workshop last year. And we had 30 authors now who are wanting to have this open textbook publishing platform that we now host and be an author there. So I think I completely agree. So for us in Delft it's easier because we don't have, of course, the typical social sciences collections. It's not about possessing, it's not about content, it's about access to the content. That's what we deliver, and to make sure that all our output of the university is being seen and being read and being cited. Anybody, any other question that you wanted to ask the others? No? So I get a hint that perhaps we should go to the floor. And I see a hand there. And here, first there in the back, yes.
Hi, good morning. Peter Berkery from AU Presses. Thanks for the thoughtful presentation. Anke, I particularly appreciated the analogy that you drew to what a monograph would cost if it were hosted on PLOS, or I forget what your other examples were, but that was actually useful. I think 2 observations I'd like to offer here. One is I think it's really important to remember that book is a generic term, and monographs, textbooks, other sorts of books, what goes into producing them is very, very different. And when we talk generically, I think some important distinctions get lost. And that brings me to my second point, which is that I'll use the word ignorant. Ignorant people could hear a conversation like this and take some very dangerous assumptions away from it. I think the most important challenge that most university presses face today is misunderstanding by provosts and funders as to what goes into the creation of a monograph. And so while I think that it's great to suggest that we shouldn't feel constrained by the container, as Anke suggested, I think it's important to understand that monographs and journals are fundamentally different artifacts. And I think it's essential to understand that the process that goes into the creation of a monograph is fundamentally different from the process that goes into the creation of a journal. And there are real differences that flow from that in terms of cost structure. And so the folks who are watching the dollars really need to constantly be reminded of those differences. I think that I had one other point, but I just totally lost it. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Back to you later. Any reflections?
I think, of course, I'm not so simple-minded as I have possibly appeared on stage, but I think there are monographs, but the bulk of the academic production in books is in collected works, and that was my argument. So I can, hopefully, my former employer will appreciate that. But so I think in my former employer, we produced possibly 80% in books that was collected works. It was not a dissertation or anything else, or not an encyclopedia or an edition. And so this is exactly what I had in mind. So I'm talking particularly about the collection. Perhaps I should have made this more clearer.
Yeah, please. Oh, yeah, you go ahead.
Anthony Watkinson. I'm going to make 2 observations, but partly they're questions also. I wrote the definition you quoted, actually, Anke, in 2003, because I was commissioned to write something about the future of the monograph, and that's why it was, and it was describing what was the situation then. There were no e-books virtually in the humanities, and there were certainly no open access books. Okay? So that's why. But and what I'm going to ask, the question I wanted to ask was twofold. One is, and again comes back to Anke's remarks, legal deposit of digital content, digital publications in the UK was from 2003. They still haven't managed in the British Library to do this other than e-versions of print. And it's not because of the publishers. Elsevier, for example, through Portico, give the British Library not only all the articles in digital form, but also the stuff around them. But they leave them and don't touch them, okay? And the books are hardly touched, as you can imagine. But why preserve this stuff? Well, what the sort of thing that Jason discussed is not preserved yet. It is not preserved after all these years because libraries do not prioritize the actual handling of multimedia material for the future. A lot of this stuff is not just peripheral stuff, it's major scholarly endeavor by humanities people. Not so much scientists, because that goes in journals, okay? But it is, and they have no effort. If you talk to the British librarian, who I know, it is about 26 down his list, and his predecessors too. He's more interested in encouraging the public to come into the library, which is a scholarly library. That's one question and point to made, and I would like to have your comments. Second one was discovery of e-books, discovery of open access book. Now Jason, and I know Heather, who is probably still here, I bet she is, yes. They both know there's work going on. There's a meeting happened in Paris very recently, and I think it may be worth talking about this, because it's a major problem, isn't it? Identifiers, yeah? So there's two things there.
Well, I could respond to the first one first. I absolutely agree. It's a huge problem and not a priority for a lot of libraries to preserve this stuff, all the ancillary materials, which is why I think it's really important that we all focus on established international standards for these kinds of content so that we can manage this migration in the future, and that libraries who maybe have one person who's a digital preservation specialist can handle this problem. Things like EPUB, MPEG, established standards will always be much more viable than being able to take whatever format a scholar might have been working in. So we need to steer authors toward working in those kinds of formats and away from heavily customized commercial things like Flash, for instance, which is a huge problem for us. So I hope we can move in that direction. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, I think I can expand on that a little. You were mentioning that it's particularly a problem of the humanities. I'm not so sure about that. It is the whole research data management arena is about exactly that. Even though, of course, the first thing you think about is tables and CSV files, but then there is the question of algorithms. There's the question of software. So this preservation part is largely unsolved, and it's mainly a problem of missing standards. I agree with that. In the humanities, it is even worse because most of the outcomes are very individualistic interpretations of what you could call a digital library or a website, all these editions. And we had problems at the Bodleian, for example. We had dozens of those. In Göttingen, we have dozens of these project outcomes that are websites on technology stacks that are sometimes 20, 25 years old. They are important findings. These are important scholars that put all their energy for 2 years into producing some kind of digital representation of what they were researching on. So it has to be preserved in a way. It's something where libraries definitely can invest, but I'm coming back to the point that I had earlier. It's a capacity question.
So to add on this, of course, the whole research workflow is something that's being thought of and cared for by libraries in general, I think, at universities. And that's not mentioning that we solved everything yet. No, yeah. You're right. Budget is a thing, but you should not refer to library budget. We have a university budget, right? Before I give the floor, and there was a second question. That was about discovery, right? Anybody to answer? Yeah.
Just that, yes, discovery is incredibly important, and in building our own platform, we found out that we really can't do it all on our own. So I think with Fulcrum we're discovering is it's going to be really important for us to take everything possible that's on Fulcrum, say Leverpress, and put those titles out to other discovery platforms as well with commercial partners, EBSCO, JSTOR, folks like Muse as well, ProQuest. So we're building up those workflows and partnerships.
Sorry, I just need to get rid of this other anecdote. So, you were referring to the importance of the deposit. Yes, I agree, but the law is, and that was also quoted in the letter, was from 1662. No, but so the law, I mean, whatever, I'm sure that we have the same. But so what I just tried in a humorous way, in a German humorous way, tried to kick off is, so if we start, we started to rethink so many paradigms now. So if we start rethinking the structure, let's take it the long way and readdress everything. And that is, I think that was the purpose.
Other questions? There in the end, there. Yeah, in the back.
All right. Does that work? Yes. Well, one of my more recent experiences in publishing is to be involved in a young publishing house focusing on the so-called young adult market. And there the data is quite interesting, and against what you've been showing, the market increased in 2017 by at least 10%, increased again last year. And this is for the printed on paper book, not the ebook. The ebook peaked about 3 years ago and now slightly declined. So I'm offering this as an interesting trend that perhaps might carry through to when these young adults become students and adults. So do you see actually, and I think one of the speakers did make this definition, that the printed book is actually still quite resilient?
Yeah, I also saw those trends. I decided against showing them. We all know that numbers, where there are always different studies and different presentations of the numbers. But I agree. We also see in some university presses an increase in what we call the hybrid model. So we have open access online and print for sale, and we were not expecting that in recent years, but it's kind of going up and down. We don't really know what will be the long-term trend, but it seems in general that it's just not over. Its print is there, yeah, and we will have to deal with it.
I agree with that. Leverpress is pursuing this hybrid model of open access plus print. It's print on demand in this case, but I think for us a lot of the fluctuations we see and the unpredictability is coming from Amazon, and we're not quite sure what algorithms are driving it, but that seems to be what we're seeing.
Hi, my name is Tessa Lobbes. I'm from the Royal Historical Society of the Netherlands, and indeed, for us historians, books and monographs matter. And I want to go back to Plan S. It mentioned also in this panel once or twice, I think. It was quite striking for me to see that Plan S is that there's no really a plan for books in Plan S. In a way that's shocking, but on the other hand, I think it's not a surprise, because Plan S seems to be designed more for the sciences and from the sciences than for the humanities. So I believe that open access publishing infrastructure for books is very bad and fragile in the countries I'm talking about, that's then Belgium and the Netherlands. And if Plan S goes through, that will be quite a disaster, because the fees are way too high for authors. So I always wonder who can publish their books. Books are mainly published in English. What about all the other languages in Europe? And books cost way too much. So I always wonder who is reading these books that cost 50 to 100 euros. Maybe I sound like a dinosaur, but I'm still quite young. So I wonder what your reflections are about these quite fundamental problems for humanities.
You want to say something, Anke? No. Yeah, Wolfram.
The risk of talking too much here. I think that the Plan S is focusing on sciences and is focusing on journals for a good reason. We have to be precise on that. I agree with the former speaker that we have to be a little bit more precise on what we're talking about. And here we should probably always say we talk about scientific journals and should restrict that. I think there is a good reason to do that now because it's a really big problem that is being tackled there, and I'm hoping that now, after 15 years of open access advocacy, I can now focus on something else because it's really working, and we should then tackle the other challenges that are, for example, monographs in the humanities or books in the humanities. And research data. I think these are the two things that are now probably keeping us busy in the next 2 decades. So I agree, you're not a dinosaur. It's just something, it's a certain epistemological category that has to be treated in a specific way.
There were some questions here up front, and then I go to you, Dirk. Shall I give the mic?
Okay, I just would like to comment, having been responsible for a long time for the book publishing at Wiley VCH. I think the term book is like an elephant, and to digitize books is also like eating an elephant, so you have to really slice it. And it's not an either or, I think it is both. We started what we called many years ago at Wiley VCH and Wiley, we said we put monographs, STM monographs through the Wiley InterScience, in those days, sausage machine. So we exactly did what Anke suggested and took them like a special issue and treated them with varying success, but at least these books were available electronically all over the world, and they could be purchased, and it was a good start. Another part of this elephant are textbooks, and a third part of this elephant are these editions, or the wonderful Faust thing from which was just published by the Wallstein Verlag in Germany, and does a lot of experiments, and there are many others around. I would like to add to this that books have a lot also to do with education and teaching and lecturing. And you said the library is used much more than before. So, and we are talking a lot about early career researchers, and I do wonder whether we shouldn't talk also with students more and lecturers, because they recommend things. Some states in Germany recommend that all do their own PowerPoint textbooks and put it on the library server or on the university server. So I think there is a lot to discuss to find an efficient way, not only to book publishing and book holdings and presentation in the library, but also for the future. which kind of experiments we want to do together, like you have a textbook workshop which supports one way of getting new textbooks and open textbooks. And these are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. You're right. So also libraries talk a lot to lecturers and to students, of course. Any other questions? So I see here, there, in the middle, and then I go to the back. There. Yeah, and then we have to close up, I think. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Heather Staines from Hypothesis. Anthony mentioned a workshop that happened last week in Paris. Many of you may be aware of the Opera's project around open research, and there is a sub-project underneath it called Hermios, which is specifically looking at humanities, ebooks, and not just English language. The idea behind the project is to implement common identifiers, common tools, peer review certification. It's about 7 different work packets across 5 open ebook platforms, with the goal then being that other providers who who want to participate can look at the different ways, because each platform is implementing them quite differently and customized according to their needs. So that project will be finishing up this summer. So you can find out more information online at Hermios or find me, and I'm happy to tell you more about it.
Thank you, Ada. And then finally the last question, I think, in the back from Dirk.
Yeah, I'm Dirk Pieper. I'm representing the national part of the OE 2020 initiative, and I will come back to the question of Plan S and the question if the open access transformation of ebooks is part of our strategy. And last year we launched a pilot model with a small publisher, Transcript Publishing in Bielefeld, which is publishing social science books. And yeah, together with Knowledge Unleashed, we found a crowd of libraries which are funding this kind of model. We have more than 45 institutions which are financing the open access transformation of a whole discipline at Transcript Publisher for open access in this year. So I think this shows that open access transformation of books is possible. And if you have a good model, if you can convince the library to contribute, and if you can create a crowd which enables the publishing of books. And we would be very happy if this could be adopted by other publishers as well.
Thank you, thank you. Then finally the last, would like to have the final word to the panel. And perhaps I mentioned in the beginning that I need some help. So we are hopefully finishing our open access policy in the Netherlands for books. So what should be in it?
Enough money.
Enough money. Yes, enough money. and another thing. Okay, the requirement that these books be made discoverable.
Free choice of different formats, I would say. It cannot be mandatory. We're not there yet.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's helpful. So let's give a last applause, I think, for the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.